Live from the Milken Global Conference, this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Carol Massar.
All right, everybody. Carol Massar, Joe Mathieu. We are live here in Beverly Hills. We're at the Milken Institute Global Conference, bringing together where money intersects with everything, whether it's politics, business. We've talked real estate today. We had former Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin just kind of going into the White House, talking about disclosure in terms of earnings, talking a little bit about Hollywood as well, right. Michael Jackson.
That's right, with Steven Mnuchin, the, of course, executive
I love that you can
producer.
do that with him.
Well, look, it's going to be the diversity of voices this hour will really give you a sense of what it's like to be at Milken, the various panels, speeches, and interviews that we're being exposed to on a regular basis. We want to bring to you here on Bloomberg TV and radio, and we're going to do exactly that over the next hour, beginning with our next guest, the force behind the Center for American Progress and a former senior advisor in the Biden administration. Neera Tanden is with us here live at Milken, and it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio.
Great to be with you.
We're surrounded by billionaires. We're surrounded by big business. Do progressives have a home at Milken?
I've come many years, so I hope so.
Okay, so you're speaking the same language, because a lot of people think the Democratic Party has lost the billionaire class. How about you?
Well, I think I do think it's really crucial for the Democratic Party to have an agenda that's focused on economic growth, and I think that that's important for the billionaire class, the working class, the middle class. I think we have maybe different visions of how we grow the economy and make sure everyone is taking part in it. But that is definitely a cornerstone of our view. And say billionaires have done really well in this country, and we'd like to see more of them and more people gaining wealth across the board.
So what's a productive policy that gets there and gets to that lower rung of the K-shaped economy?
Yeah, I think the big things we're seeing and really the stress people are feeling is in cost of living, and that's housing costs, healthcare costs, utility costs. Healthcare costs have gone up 25% in the last 5 years. Housing costs went up 30% over the last 5 years. So people, I think, are really struggling to make ends meet. So we believe that we should put forward ideas, have ideas out there that would.
Like what? Tell me how we make or break this, because we've been talking about expensive housing for a while. Healthcare costs, man, we've been talking about that for a long time. So what is a policy that we can put in place that actually changes this direction?
Excellent. So housing costs are such that for a first time buying your first home, the average age today is now 38 years old. It used to be 25, 29 years old. Rents have gone up, as I said, 30% over the last 5 years. So that's a huge struggle for people. So the way to do that is to build supply, expand supply, make it easier to build, deal with permitting reform, but also put incentives down for building. And when communities are building, we think we should provide some kind of tax relief to renters for a limited period of time so they feel a benefit from that increase. So those are ideas.
You know who gets tax breaks? Big developers. To build those big buildings. I have a lot in my neighborhood, and I'm like, why are my taxes going up, but you're getting that break?
Yes, but I think we should expand support for housing, but we should also ensure that first-time homeowners, renters, they get access to support as well.
Yeah, you're a professional at messaging when it comes to the Democratic Party, right? You were helping to craft the message for the midterm elections, and I'm fascinated by how little it actually changes. It's getting prices down. Yeah. And maybe it's no new wars. Yeah. That's the same mantra that Donald Trump got elected on. That's the same mantra that Joe Biden got elected on before him. And we're going to, so it's a consistent set of issues. It's just a question of who you want to have solve it. Which approach will win? How do you message that in this cycle?
I honestly think this is what I find so surprising about the last year, right? Because we had a cost of living concern. And what's interesting about the American people is they're as concerned about cost of living, if not more so today, than 4 years ago when we were at 9% inflation. Inflation has come down. Sure. It's still, prices haven't come down relative to where they were before. I mean, people really feel
it's just the rate of increase.
Yes, exactly. No, that is why people are angry. Yeah. That is why people are angry. But what I find surprising about policies, and I do think this gives an opening to a lot of Democrats, is the tariffs and the war are really increasing costs for people. The gas prices, obviously, with the war, which I just think no one really expected coming into this administration, that you'd see tariffs that are essentially a version of a national sales tax and disproportionately felt by working class people because they're buying more stuff.
Will Democrats then run on a no tariff platform? Is that what we're going to hear in this cycle?
We definitely need to pull back on the tariffs.
Yeah, okay. So no new tariffs. lower prices, no new wars.
Yeah, and end the wars. End the wars. Lower healthcare costs, lower utility costs.
How do you win the trust of people to say Democrats can do that?
Yeah. Well, I think that's really going to be up to candidates with real ideas of how to do it. You can't just mouth words. You have to give people actual ideas of how to do it. And sometimes you have to fight some special interests on the way. And I think that gives candidates a lot of credibility as well.
How do you fight the business community? I mean, pockets are deep. Lobbyists are out there in full force. You know, it's companies that do have the deep pockets and making sure and helping lawmakers get back there in Washington. So the money in politics and who is really heard, I think, is really problematic today.
Yeah. I think that is a core concern for democracy. But I guess what I'd say I don't think we should be fighting business. That's not the way I think about it. I think about it from the perspective.
No, I love capitalism too, but I just want to make sure that I'm heard, Joe's heard, you're heard.
Well, I think
kind of the average Joe.
Yes,
you're not average.
100%. I think what really concerns my genuine view is what people, they don't hate that a billionaire exists. They hate that a billionaire has a billion times more political power. Working class people actually want to become wealthier. But what they're angry about is a system where like the billionaires pervert our democracy. So I think we all have a stake in actually a functioning democracy.
On that, will a billionaire tax be something that the Democrats will endorse going forward?
I think there will be some Democrats that endorse that, but a lot of Democrats would say that doesn't actually make sense. A wealth tax may not make sense, but a tax on, I do think wealthier people should pay more. The big tax cuts that were deficit finance and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that went to the highest income people. I think a lot of people wonder, why are we doing that when our deficit is
I was going to ask you how many times you've been asked about a billionaire tax since you've been at Milken. Does that come up every time you walk in the room?
I haven't. I genuinely think that there's problems with doing a wealth tax. The Supreme Court will overturn the wealth tax. But I do think we should all be thinking about how the tax structure can seem more fair to all Americans, and maybe billionaires having a higher tax rate than other people would be a part of that.
A couple years ago, being at Milken, and very wealthy individuals coming up to me and saying, "We get it. It's our time. Like we've got to pay more." Like they understand. They don't think it's ridiculous, and yet hear the battle, right?
Yeah.
I think
it's not going to make them poor.
I know. I actually think I
love billionaires. I'm employed by a billionaire. I'm very happy about it.
I know a fair number of wealthy people who are willing to pay more taxes. I think that's just part of the social contract of the country, and we should. That's that's the right path.
Really interesting. We've got a debate tonight in California for the next governor. I'm just wondering who you're looking at here, because a lot of people talk about the Center for American Progress as a shadow administration or a Democratic administration in waiting. The people who you share office space with, if the Democrats win the White House, will probably be moving in. Who do you have your eyes on when it comes to the Newsoms, when it comes to the Coopers and others around the country who might actually make a stand, the Pete Buttigieg? Do you have a bench that you can, once we get through the midterms, have confidence in?
I'm very impressed with the broad bench of governors, new generation leaders around the country. I think there's a real hunger, not just amongst Democrats, but for something new that's more uniting in the country. And we have hosted a lot of people who are governors and members of Congress. We have a Path Forward series where we've had Pritzker and Governor Pritzker, Governor Shapiro. We'll have Governor Newsom in a few weeks, Governor Moore. I think
that's the short list, though. Huh? That's the short list.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes. Well, it is good to come to CAP if you want to be on that short list.
Yes. Funny how that works.
Well done. Well done, Neera. Thank you. This was really fun.
Oh, so great to be with you. Have fun.
Great to have you.
Managing the conference.
We are. Neera Tanden, who's President and CEO of Center for American Progress, joining us right here, and of course, former policy advisor to President Joe Biden. All right, let's get back to the markets. A lot going on here. Let's toss it back to Charlie Pelley back in New York.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. We are looking at records right now on the S&P 500 index. We have got crude oil moving lower, equities moving higher. Right now, the S&P is up 56, standing at 72.57. That is a gain of just about 0.8%. Dow Industrials up 254 now on the Dow. We're at 49,195, a gain of 0.5%. To be sure, potential record on the S&P. NASDAQ 100 index also pushing higher. NASDAQ right now up 0.9%. We do have the NASDAQ 100 index up now by 1.3%. All of this with the VIX just above 17, a 10-year at 4.41%, a 2-year 3.93%, and the 30-year 4.98%. Spot gold is up $33 the ounce to $45.55 now, higher by 0.7%. And a retreat for crude, certainly helping with equity sentiment. WTI down 3.9%, 102.26, still above $100 a barrel. Brent 110.52, barrel of Brent down now by 3.4%. Bitcoin 81,222 on Bitcoin, up by about 1.6%. So bottom line here, relative calm returning to markets as oil falls and stocks do advance. The SEC is out with a proposal that would allow American companies to report earnings semi-annually instead of quarterly. Critics argue that less frequent reports could increase the risk of insider trading and allow companies to bury bad news. Earnings news, Pinterest surging after reporting first quarter sales that topped analyst estimates. Right now we do have Pinterest shares. They are rallying by 8.4%. Pinterest did give an outlook for revenue in the current period that was higher than anticipated. Again, recapping here, S&P up 54, up 0.8%. Back we go to the Milken Global Conference in Beverly Hills. And once again, your hosts, here they are, Massar and Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie Pellet, live in New York. We'll be back with more on the markets coming up a little bit later on this hour as we connect the dots between the conversations here at Milken in Beverly Hills with the action that we're seeing on Wall Street. And, of course, all the cross currents from the war in the Middle East, Carol, to lower oil prices, interest rates, all colliding here in a pretty fascinating set of conversations. And we've been talking a lot about the war in Iran.
We have.
Amos Hochstein spent time with us, Neera Tanden. There's another war that's going on that in many cases has been overshadowed by what's happening.
And folks are bringing it up and reminding us that the war between Russia and Ukraine, we're now in our 5th year. Who'd have thought? We thought it. Some might have said it might have been resolved earlier, but it continues. And I even saw some more actions, I think, about drone action over in Russia by Ukraine this morning. So it continues in a big way.
It certainly does. And there are a lot of questions about resources, whether, of course, we're going to be able to continue to provide the weapons to Ukraine that we have for many years, knowing the needs that are in place now in the Middle East when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Israel, and the massive amount of work we need to do in our defense industrial base. But the political side of this, the relationship between President Trump and Vladimir Putin and the looming summit between Presidents Trump and Xi will all play into the way this works. And it's where we start our conversation now with Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is the Vice President of Free Russia Foundation and a voice that we've been looking forward to hearing from here at Milken. Welcome to Bloomberg.
Thank you so
Your
much
first visit to Milken and L.A., so
Absolutely.
I hope this is going well for you. And I just wonder if you worry that Ukraine will be left in the back of the shelf the more focus we put on Iran.
Well, frankly, Ukraine has been put on a back shelf since Donald Trump came into the White House, because I think there's absolutely no doubt that the current president of the United States, however crazily that sounds, is actually on the side of Vladimir Putin. He's generally on the side of dictatorships against democracies, and that's clearly the case also in the war.
He says he's been harder on Putin than any president in history.
Yeah, well, I think, I'm a historian, and we historians usually go by the facts, not by what people say. I think it's absolutely clear that in the war that Russian dictator and usurper Vladimir Putin has unleashed against Ukraine, the sympathies of the current U.S. administration are clearly with Putin.
Help us understand this relationship between President Trump and President Putin. Some say, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Is it possible that this is strategy on the part of President Trump to pretend that there is friendships, or how do you see this relationship, what it really means? Because there are times he has pushed back, certainly, at the Russian president.
I'm not a psychologist, but in my view...
but you understand Russia. You've been in prison. You've had to deal with what is the reality of what goes on in Russia and what is
I think
the
Donald Trump
there.
just likes Vladimir Putin, and this is the root of the problem. I mean, we hear all these conspiracy theories about some potential compromat or whatever that Russian security services may have on Mr. Trump. One day, once the Putin regime is gone and the archives are open in Russia, in a future democratic Russia, we may find this out. Obviously, I don't have any inside information on this, but I just think that the main problem is that Trump likes Putin. He likes autocrats. He likes so-called strongmen. That word, by the way, is deeply misleading. There's nothing strong about imprisoning or killing your opponents, about falsifying elections, about muzzling the media. That's actually the behavior of somebody who is weak and insecure, which is what Vladimir Putin is. But Trump likes dictators. I mean, I think he would like to have no parliament, no elections, no media. Of course, the situation is very different in Russia and in America. When Vladimir Putin came to power, Russia only had 10 years of democracy behind it. And so it took him only a few years to destroy our democratic institutions, the separation of powers, free elections, independent independent media, and so on. You in the US this year are marking the 250th anniversary of your democracy. So, of course, the situation and the context are very different. But if we're talking about personalities, I think they're just fundamentally alike, and this is the problem.
Well, our audience should know that you have personally felt the wrath of Vladimir Putin, and having been poisoned not once but twice, yet you're sitting here with us today. There's news this week that Vladimir Putin is receiving additional security, that they're beefing up security around the president because of the number of threats against him. Is that justified? And what are you hearing about the opposition in Russia?
First of all, if I could argue with the terminology, let's not call him president. He's not a president. He's a dictator and a usurper. Presidents don't stay in power for 26 years, which is how long he's been in power. And we haven't had a free election in Russia for more than 2 decades. This is not my opinion. This is the verdict of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is the gold standard for election observation. But yeah, I mean, it's clear that Putin is paranoid. He's spending most of the time in the bunkers. There are anti-missile systems around his, his residences. We hear about additional security, of course, in the coming days. There will be a victory day parade on Red Square, which is going to be massively scaled down because Putin is afraid, he's afraid of Ukrainian drones, he's afraid of a potential coup, he's afraid of attempts on his life, he's afraid of everything. I mean, this is what happens when you cling to power for more than 2 decades with no elections, with no independent media, with no normal political system. This is how all these dictators end up.
Is there an
paranoid
effort to
in
kill
their
him?
bunker? Well, first of all, frankly, I wish that Vladimir Putin spends as much time in prison as possible. I want to see him in the dock on trial for all the crimes, being held accountable for all the crimes he's committed against our own people in Russia. Let's not forget the 2 main opposition leaders in Russia, Boris Nemtsov and Alexei Navalny, have been murdered on Vladimir Putin's personal orders. There are thousands of political prisoners in our country, more than 2,000 known political prisoners, according to human rights groups. This is more than the whole of the Soviet Union, that's 15 countries put together, had in the mid-1980s. And of course, for the 5th year now, and really for the 13th year now, because the annexation of Crimea happened back in March of 2014. Vladimir Putin has been leading the largest military conflict in Europe since the end of the Second World War. I want him to be held accountable for this.
I want to understand something in how you see President Trump, because he can remove dictators. Look at what happened with Maduro in Venezuela. Look at what's happening in Iran. Like, there are times he does push back against dictators. So I just wonder, what is the special mix here between these 2 individuals? And do you start to also think about, nobody lives forever. Do you think about life, without Putin, and then what happens in Russia?
It's not just that we think about it, we have to think about it, we have to plan for it, and not just we,
But is it being
the Russian
planned for?
opposition. Yes, it is, and in fact our organization, the Free Russia Foundation, and other groups like Memorial and Yulia Navalny's Forum are actively working on a roadmap for a post-Putin transition in Russia. We're also doing this on the international level. I'm a member of the Platform for Dialogue with Russian Democratic Forces at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which brings together lawmakers from 46 European countries. Yeah. Look, Russian history teaches us that major political changes in our country happen like this, swiftly, suddenly, and totally unexpectedly. Both the Tsarist regime and the communist regime collapsed in 3 days, literally speaking. Nobody saw it coming. Whenever the Putin regime falls, it will be just as sudden and just as unexpected. And we have no right to be unprepared for that because Russia is too important.
Anytime soon?
Could be in 3 years and could be in 2 weeks. This is Russia. But the point is we have to be ready because Russia matters. Russia is too important. And for as long as there's a dictatorial regime in Russia, Russia will continue to remain a threat not just to its own people, our own people, but also to everybody around. And the only way to have long-term peace and security in Europe is with a democratic Russia, a reliably democratic Russia that will respect the rights and freedoms of its own people and that will respect the borders of its neighbors. And we have to work towards that post-Putin democratic Russia together.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to spend some time with you, and we appreciate
Thank you so much
your
for
insights here on Bloomberg. Enjoy the rest of the Milken conference. Alongside Carol Massar, I'm Joe Mathieu in Beverly Hills, and we want to bring you into an interesting conversation, not about Russia, but geopolitics and the effort to harden resources, sovereign efforts to have additional resources when it comes to governments, the AI race, and infrastructure. Held a panel on the geopolitics of supply, and we heard from the chief strategy officer at Cerberus, Nate Fick. Let's listen.
I came back to finance. I came to Cerberus most recently from the State Department after serving as ambassador for cyber and digital for the United States, where I led our technology diplomacy around the world. And in that job, everything that my colleagues here have said resonated very strongly. And so in thinking now about the investment opportunity, I do think we have to nest it in the question of what's going on. Summarizing the state of the world in 2026 in 30, 60, 90 seconds feels daunting. I think, though, every one of us on the stage is saying different versions of the same thing, which is sort of geopolitics is back. Like if you went to college 20 or 30 years ago, you read books like The End of History and The World is Flat, and maybe you feel a little bit lied to. It didn't end, the world's not flat, right? And in that geopolitical competition, these battlegrounds are emerging, and they are primarily technological or industrial. They are AI, they are navigation systems, they are telecom infrastructure. They're all these things we're talking about. All of those systems, to Amir's point, were optimized more or less since the end of World War II for cost and for economic efficiency. And then, put aside the war in Iran, put aside U.S.-China competition. Do you remember the ship getting stuck in the Suez?
Sure.
Like even events like that, relatively minor, things that you might have been inclined to laugh about over the breakfast table, actually reverberated through the global economy in some really fascinating ways. So those supply chains now are being rewired. And that's a long-term rewiring. And then the fourth thing I would point to is this isn't about one political administration. The Biden administration did the CHIPS Act and the IRA. The Trump administration is doing an array of things, and whoever comes next in the United States is going to have to confront this. It's also not just about the United States. You've got German auto manufacturers repurposing production lines for defense, Japanese defense spending. You can look around the world. To answer your question, it's macro-secular and enduring. It's of critical importance to many economies around the world. And so in that is, the silver lining to the very dark cloud from a human perspective is a huge amount of opportunity, I think, in all the areas that everyone up here has discussed.
Miriam, as the CEO of a publicly traded company, do shareholders understand that? Do they appreciate the need for that investment? Because so many days we find ourselves after the closing bell, there's an announcement on CapEx and the stock's going down because there's great worry about overspending on this.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I think the shareholders do understand the coming of national security, and a lot of spend is in the national, as Nate can tell you, and it's very much focused on how do we build resiliency, how do we bring national security together with the private markets, how do they come together to form public-private partnerships, right? And how can the government play a role in this? And I think they do see that opportunity. However, they also see the risk.
There you have a taste of our panel here at Milken on the geopolitics of supply, which, of course, is something that we talk about just about every day here. But interesting to hear from voices around the world. Those were business owners and executives operating in the Middle East, operating in Asia, and they each have a slightly different angle on this, although it's a common thread throughout this conference.
I feel like the supply chain grab is on, and some people in some countries are certainly better positioned than others.
Supply chain grab. We should have called the panel that. I like that.
All right, I'll work on it. Hey, we're going to do a little bit of a switch to something that's actually top of mind because we have PayPal out today planning job cuts. The new CEO is really pursuing kind of a massive turnaround strategy at this company. They're going to make Venmo a standalone unit. But we think about these payment companies, Joe, that I don't know about you, but I'm using mine all the time.
100%.
Kind of this concept of digital money. We want to see what Denise Leonhard has to say. She's the chief of Zelle. I use Zelle a lot.
Thank you.
She's here at Milken. You're very welcome. Tell us about this, because this is a consortium of banks that are involved in it, and it's kind of direct to bank transfer. Tell us about your world, what you're seeing in terms of activity on the platform, and what it kind of tells you about our economy.
Yeah, so we are owned by a consortium of 7 of the largest banks, but we actually have a network of 2,400 financial institutions. So that's everything from the largest bank in the United States to those small community banks and credit unions, and those are really important to us. And we have 160 million accounts on the platform. That includes consumers as well as small businesses. And in December, we actually had 100 million of those accounts were actually active. So during that holiday season, 100 million customers in the United States were actually using Zelle.
Which is pretty typical, or was that?
Yeah, it's actually pretty typical.
Okay.
And we continue to see this increase in terms of digital payments. So we had $1.2 trillion moved on the platform last year. So that's larger than the GDP of Switzerland, to put that into context. And we're continuing to grow at 20% year over year. So we just continue to see more and more people move away from cash, move away from check, and go to these digital payments.
You just had, I believe, your second consecutive $1 trillion year.
Exactly.
Where do you find growth from here? I know that you're working on potentially having an opportunity for people to pay their mortgages, to pay their rent, recurring payments like this that might make your life a little bit easier. Is that the next opportunity for Zelle?
It is. So when we talk about the value proposition of Zelle, it's exactly how you described it. It's moving from one account to another account and being able to do that quickly and safely and securely. So what we want to do is actually just open up more use cases for people to be able to use Zelle. Okay. So that includes small businesses. Yep. It includes, we have currently a pilot with bill pay with our friends at Truist. We also have a pilot for donor advised funds in order to get into the charity space with Bank of America. Huh. So we're continuing to pilot these and hoping to expand them and expand our roadmap.
You just want more and more people on the platform.
More and more people, and also thinking about us more and more often.
Denise, where's the growth? You talk about bill pay, you talk about donor advised, you talk about small business. Where's the growth?
Yeah, I think that there is growth in all of it, actually. So it's just that recurrence and using us continually to make all those different payments to people or to small businesses that you know and trust.
Can you tell us in terms of data? I mean, everybody's got lots of data, anything that's digital. So what can you tell us about the types of payments? And does it give you any indication about the health of this economy? It feels pretty good. We talk about the market going up, but we know the market isn't necessarily what is going on in the broader economy.
So on the platform itself, we continually see this increase of overall payments. So again, 20% year over year. But what we're also seeing is this boom in terms of small businesses. So 30% of our volume is small businesses, and that's actually our fastest growing segment. So part of the reason why small businesses love Zelle is because they get their money almost immediately, and then they can be able to pay their workers, or they can be able to go out and buy supplies instantaneously. So it's that quickness of payments that people love.
Is your sort of long-term vision or your dream a cashless society?
Well, when's the last time you went to an ATM?
I was just kidding. I don't know about you.
I'm already living
Hey, Joe, they got rid of the penny.
They did. They don't make them anymore. I keep finding them in my pockets, though.
I try to remind my daughter, there is actually money under all of
this. I
this.
feel silly sometimes. I don't remember the last time I carried cash, but there are a lot of people that do. And I guess, is that the goal, where cash is useless?
I mean, the goal for us is to more and more digital payments. It's more safe, it's more secure, and it's also more convenient.
Does the structure stay just as, multiple bank ownership? Is it something that this is a company that could essentially go out on its own?
I think
that makes sense.
It will stay in the current ownership structure. It's actually fun to be part of this ownership structure because you get the best payment minds in a room often. And really thinking about the innovation as the entire ecosystem moving forward.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see that. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
Another snapshot of what goes on here at Milken. Denise Leonhard, she's chief of Zelle, joining Joe and me right here on set. Hey, folks, back to the markets we go, back to New York and back to Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We are trading at just about the best level of the day right now on the S&P 500 index. Relative calm returning to U.S. markets. Stocks higher, oil moving lower right now. We've got West Texas Intermediate crude oil. It is trading down by 4.3%. WTI trading at just above $101 a barrel right now. Barrel of Brent crude at 110. It is down by 3.8%. Stocks are rising. Oil is falling. Amid signs that a U.S.-Iran ceasefire is still in place, that is reducing fears about a full-scale war. The S&P 500 index higher now by 60 points at 7260, up by about 0.8%. Dow Industrials up 307 on the Dow, gain there of 0.6%, while NASDAQ higher by 243 points for the NASDAQ Composite Index, up by 1%. The Russell 2000 Index of small-cap shares up now by 1.5%. And the SOX, so that is the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index. It is surging now by another 4.8%. All of this with the VIX just above 17, the 10-year 4.41%. Recapping, S&P up 0.8%. And back we go to the Milken Conference in Beverly Hills. Once again, your hosts, Massar and Joe Mathieu.
All right, so appreciate it. Charlie Pellet there with an update on the trade on this. Yes, it's Tuesday. I get lost when I'm on the West Coast. The 3-hour time difference, where am I?
I pledged to stay on East Coast time one day, and it's already gone.
That's my watch is East Coast. My phone is West Coast. All right, we are back here at Bloomberg Institute. The Milken Institute. Boy,
there you go.
Did I just tell them that I just renamed it?
Well, we could maybe work on that for next year.
We could do it. Milken Institute Global Conference.
Yes.
Kara-Murza, Joe Mathieu here in Beverly Hills.
One thing we talk about a lot, and we've spent some time talking about the energy space over the course of this program. Amos Hochstein painted a pretty bleak picture. We also talked a lot about data centers, and these two stories come together in a way that has reinvigorated the conversation about nuclear. In a way that nobody could have really predicted. We talk about it with experts in the industry, the need for more power. We talk about it with lawmakers who are trying to find a policy path. And our next guest can speak to all of this. Maria Korsnick is the president and chief executive officer of the Nuclear Energy Institute, the trade group for the nuclear industry. It's wonderful to see you. I'm sure you've been awfully busy at Milken. This is a conversation a lot of people are trying to get close to, whether it's the small modular reactors that could end up landing around data centers, whether it's actually taking old decommissioned nuke plants out of the mothballs and putting it back online. When do we start actually building and seeing approvals when these projects are proposed?
Well, we're doing that already, right? So you have the TerraPower had their construction permit approved out in Wyoming. They're beginning construction. They're building actually in Canada, the GE Vernova, first SMR for that's about 300 megawatts. And then down in Tennessee, the Kairos Power test reactor is under construction as well. So we have actually, transitioned from just some great ideas to actual construction.
Maria, when does nuclear though become something really significant in the United States, in a country where we know there's a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of areas that just don't want to have any kind of nuclear facility in their area?
Well, we're 20% of the electricity sector today, so I would say nuclear is already making a difference. And honestly, we're not hearing the pushback that you're mentioning for local communities anymore. One of the latest polls showed greater than a 60% favorability rating for nuclear and climbing. And I think part of that is what you mentioned. It's the data center conversation. Data centers are looking for really reliable energy. They'd like it to be clean. Nuclear is here to help. And so you're going to be seeing, first of all, extending the lives of plants we have. Started out 40, we got it to 60, have over about 25 plants approved for an 80-year life. Okay, so what you have is going to last longer. What you have can make more power. So 3/4 of the fleet are going to do power uprates. That's going to bring 5-ish to 6 gigawatts of new power to the grid.
Fascinating.
And that can be short term.
Are the near-term solutions small modular reactors, or should people get used to seeing large plants like we used to at just a different scale in the old days?
Yes, all of the above.
Okay.
All of the above.
If you're a data center, though, do you want an SMR on your property?
Yeah, it might. So there's a couple different things. If you're a data center, you need that power. Constant, right? They don't want to have that disruption.
As well.
Could be off the grid. But because of the high reliability that you want, you might want to have a couple of small packages rather than one large package. If you're a really big data center, you might want several large packages. So I think it depends on your solution, but it's literally all of the above. From the large gigawatt size to the medium size to the even really small, we call them micro reactors. So think less than a megawatt even. And so you're going to be able to look at nuclear as a solution set in ways that you just never thought before.
You mentioned the SMRs, though. Do we really have a viable design and it's happening? Because I feel like we've been talking about it. So how long, though, before those are actually in use and production?
So one's in construction in Wyoming, one's in construction in Canada. You just heard X Energy within the last 2 weeks do their IPO, raised over $1 billion. That's an SMR.
But when are they up and running? What are you hearing?
So early 2030s, I think, for that design. But the GE design, I think, is talking about being online in 2030, and same for the TerraPower design.
Do you think, when you guys ask Americans if they're comfortable with it, I mean, is it because is it against the backdrop of higher electricity prices? Because I think Americans are feeling so squeezed. And is that where they say, okay, if that's what's going to make it less expensive for me, I'm in?
You know, it's a combination of things. Do you want energy security? Nuclear has that. Do you want it clean? Nuclear has that. Do you want it reliable? Nuclear has that. I mean, the value proposition broadly for nuclear, and it's not just here in the United States, it's around the globe.
What do you need from Washington? What do you need from policymakers to continue the growth?
It's still hard to go first.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're asking for from a legislation perspective is what's called the ARC Act, which is something that's going to help the government lean in on a little bit of those first-of-a-kind risks just to help those get ameliorated so you can move right in. The other thing is we got some energy credits, the tax credits, and they're wonderful.
Yeah.
There are a couple of tweaks. Would like to opt out of normalization to let you get that tax credit faster, and some transferability. And both of those are in legislation that's on the Hill now.
All right, interesting stuff. We didn't talk about nuclear waste, which is always an issue, too.
Next time.
I'm going to leave it there. Maria, though, thank you so much, because I do feel like when we talk energy, you're right. Everybody's saying we need it all in order to power. Right. Maria Korsnick, Nuclear Energy Institute CEO, joining us right here at Milken.
Thanks, Maria. It's great to have you with us.
Appreciate it.
Thank
We've
you.
got a lot more ahead coming up the rest of this hour as we continue on day 2 here at the Milken Global Conference in Beverly Hills. It's been a really interesting mix of policy, of executives, and in some cases, celebs walking around the hotel here.
I have to say, I love this conversation with Maria because I go back to about 2 or 3 years ago. We did something at NJIT out in New Jersey, and wanted to talk about power, and all they wanted to talk about was nuclear energy. And it really kind of caught us off guard because we felt like that had been pushed to the side in the U.S.
You'd be amazed at how many lawmakers tell us they want to talk about this when they come on the air now in Washington as well. And you've got an administration that has clearly embraced nuclear as the way forward. It's an administration that's embraced AI, and it's hard to separate the two.
We have an administration also embracing space. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on this hour. All of that to come as Joe Mathieu and I continue from the Milken Institute Global Conference. We are in Beverly Hills, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Carol Massar, live from the Milken Global Conference on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is the center of the business and political universes all at once here in Beverly Hills. Thanks for being with us on what we'll call a special edition of Balance of Power here at the Milken Global Conference.
We'll take special.
We'll take special, indeed. Well, Carol Massar's with us. It's got to be. I'm Joe Mathieu, as you just heard live at Milken, and it's been an interesting conversation today that we want to continue here by going to the top of the mountain with the face of American business.
I have to feel exactly, and I feel like all the conversations we've had lead up to this, whether we talked about energy, higher costs, inflation, supply chains, geopolitics, politics in Washington. Suzanne Clark is with us. She's president and CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. A great voice when it comes to what's going on in the business community. What is top of mind? Because the laundry list of things that is coming at American businesses right now is a lot.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I was saying a minute ago that we were just with the LA Chamber yesterday, and it's such an opportunity to get out and talk to local businesses, big and small, about what's happening in their community. And what we see is businesses really trying to deal with all of this uncertainty. What should they be doing about finding workers? What should they be doing about their supply chains? What will happen with the economy? What does AI mean? So all the things that you've been tackling all morning, business leaders are live trying to figure out themselves.
What conversations are you having when it comes to affordability? I know you were on a panel today with Neera Tanden. It was on the broadcast a little bit earlier. Both of you, I'm sure, coming from different perspectives. When you're trying to keep American business in mind, knowing price pressures from the gas pump to the grocery store are very real. You reached for the word uncertainty first. How do you speak with your members about this, of the challenges they're facing and about to face?
Well, let me say first that Neera and I had violent agreement about the need for permitting reform, right? That we really need to build things faster. All of it, right? It's housing, it's electricity, it's utility costs, it's, so what could we do as a country to build things faster, more efficiently, and cheaper? So that comes up with affordability. The U.S. Chamber, we really believe a lot of the root of the affordability problem is a supply constraint, right? We don't have enough housing. We don't have enough access to health care. We have labor shortages in key sectors. We don't have a resilient supply chain. So the question is, if we want long-term economic growth, 3% growth that lifts up families and communities in the country and helps pay off debt, if we want all of that, we got to take some of these structural issues really seriously.
Like which one? If we could tackle one right now, in this given moment, what would it be that you think the American businesses could really get behind and say, this is a game changer?
I really think it would be permitting reform.
Okay.
Think about the fact that it takes 5 to 7 years to get a permit. In that time, you'll have a change of administrations, most likely. Right. So if you have one administration that prefers one type of energy, and you have a different administration that prefers a different type of energy, how do you decide where to invest and what to build? And yet at the same time, as you've reported, we need all of the above.
Suzanne, how do we get there, though? Because I think about, the American business community, they have a great line often to the White House and to lawmakers. So how do they say, hey, folks, it's not just about 4 years, 4 years, 4 years. It's about a 10-year plan. China does it. It's a whole different country, and I know that. But how do we do that so that we really commit longer term to build some of these things that need that perspective?
It's such a good point, Carol, because we certainly do not want a government-planned economy, right? None of us are for that.
No,
but you're right that we do need government to set the conditions so that we can grow, so business can solve these problems at scale that society really needs answers to. And I think maybe we have to do two things a little differently. One is talk to more people at the local level, local businesses, local chambers, and get them to drive community support for politicians who are willing to do some hard things. And two, I think businesses are going to have to get more involved earlier in the process, in the primary process, and really thinking about candidates who don't want to just admire the problems and say expedient things, but are willing to do hard work and take hard votes.
I think about you sitting in your headquarters right across from Lafayette Square, looking out the window at that White House. You've been there a lot longer than this administration, and to your point, you're going to be there for administrations in the future. But this Trump administration has embraced crypto in a way that we have not seen in a White House before. And of course, the timing has a lot to do with this suddenly kind of going mainstream. And there's a Clarity Act that Republicans and some Democrats are hoping to see passed this year. In fact, it could be sooner than later. Are we managing the rules of the road when it comes to crypto in a way that the chamber can support this approach?
I really like the question, and I really even more like the preamble, right?
Yeah.
Which is, we just had our 114th birthday.
How about that?
I know. I don't look a day over 112. I really feel...
You look amazing.
Thank you. I really feel the weight of the fact that, who was the guy in my office in the Depression or in World War II, and how did they think about emerging technologies, emerging financial instruments? How did they think about the impact on working families and communities and American security and competitiveness? And how do we do the long-term right things while being empathetic to the real short-term pain? Okay, yeah. So I think your preamble was just so important. We actually do need institutions with historical memory and reach, and I think it's really important.
Sound like an institutionalist. But the chamber not taking a position on crypto?
Look, I think what we want to do is be supportive of new technologies at the same time that we don't lose sight of what really works in this country and the traditional capital markets and traditional financial services. We want to be careful.
Banks have been watching this so closely.
That's right.
And they've gone from pushing back completely, not interested, to embracing slowly, but I think moving carefully. But there is this concern. We talk about disruption and innovation, that how could something like the digital world or cryptocurrencies replace so much of what the banks do? So is there a lot of pushback that you guys are getting from the banks?
At what point is that innovation good, and at what point is that disruption dangerous, right? And it's what you're always balancing with a new technology. And so I applaud these industries and these companies that are educating Congress and getting to a point where we can do something that makes sense and makes sense for business.
It's, of course, not just crypto. When we think of emerging technologies, there's another industrial revolution happening right now.
Have you heard of it?
You take the words from Jensen Huang, that's what he calls it. How concerned is the chamber about, to your point, there are wonderful things that AI is bringing to us, but there could also be a negative disruption when it comes to the job market. Is that a worry of yours?
Do you want to hear something cool? Do you know the people having the fastest uptake of AI?
Yeah.
Small business.
Okay.
It's the first technology in the United States that small business embraced first, which is really a leveling out, right? A great equalizer. Last year, the United States had 5.6 million new business starts. That's optimism for you. Yeah. And some of that is that they can do more with AI, which is really fascinating. So the answer to your question is, of course, everyone can see there's a disruption coming. We don't have revolutions without some kind of disruption. How do we help people through that? Because we're long-term optimistic about job growth, about health impact, about the innovation, about what it does for our country. We want to compete with our adversaries, right? So I think this is a really important topic, and we're going to have to do reskilling and education. But the short-term disruption, I think, is going to lead to a nice hockey stick.
You know, we need a little bit of optimism. I feel like there's been a lot of serious stuff we've talked about today.
Let's take it. Yes. Thank you for the optimism.
Suzanne, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Suzanne Clark, President and CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. All right, folks, back to New York headquarters of Bloomberg and a look at the markets. Here's Charlie Pellet.
I thank you very much. Do want to stick with the optimism theme because right now we have got the bulls charging higher. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing right now. S&P 500 index up 61. We are looking at a gain of just about 0.8%. Potential record close on the S&P at 72.62 where we stand right now. We've got the Dow Industrials up 308 on the Dow. That is a gain now of just about 0.6%. While NASDAQ higher by 250 points on the NASDAQ Composite Index. That is a gain right now of just about 1%. NASDAQ 100 Index also trading at a record up right now by 1.4%. The SOX ripping higher by 4.8%. That is the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's Semiconductor Index. All of this against the backdrop of a VIX just above 17. 10-year at 4.41%, the 2-year 3.93%, and right now we have got the 30-year at 4.98%. Gold up $39 the ounce to $45.61, up by about 0.9%. Crude, major story today, relative calm returning to global markets, stocks higher and crude oil lower. 101.74 on WTI right now. WTI down 4.4%. Brent just below 110 right now. It is down by 4%. Bitcoin 81,345 on Bitcoin, up by just about 1.8%. We've got Apple saying it will let users choose from a range of outside AI services to power features across its software. Sources tell Bloomberg users will be able to select from multiple third-party AI models for tasks like generating and editing text and images. Right now, Apple is up by 2.1%. Recapping, S&P up 0.8%. Back we go to the Milken Global Conference in Beverly Hills, and your hosts, Massar and Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much.
Ready to go to space?
We're going to go to space. Charlie would have wanted to come with us here. I feel like, Charlie, you're going to like this. We are going to go to space here to talk about another emerging technology, but it's also one that has been rather mainstream. And it's not just SpaceX. It's not just Jeff Bezos. There's a massive collection of companies that fulfill what we call the modern space industry. And one of them is Northwood Space, where Bridgit Mendler is CEO and co-founder and joins us right now live from the Milken Global Conference. It's wonderful to see you and welcome. You actually control the ground infrastructure that helps to make satellites work. As I mentioned, it's not always the most obvious type of approach that your company has found something unique. When you're talking to business leaders here at Milken, what markets are opening for you? What does this mainstreaming of space mean for your company?
Yeah, well, thank you both very much for having me. It's fun to have the occasion to talk about space at a forum such as this. Yeah. And what we do is that networking infrastructure between Earth and space, so enabling all of the space missions that we are seeing commercialized, whether it's things like direct-to-cell applications, really expanding the telecom sector, or different national security priorities, or enthusiasm around compute and growing compute solutions from orbit, really bringing a lot of the industries that have typically been terrestrial into a more expansive architecture that goes beyond.
Bridgit, got to ask you, because again, somebody like an Elon Musk and a lot of stuff that he is doing, whether it's Starlink, tell us how you differentiate what you guys are doing from a lot of the big players, so we understand exactly what this business is.
Yeah, and so what we're excited to solve with our company is the networking infrastructure for the industry writ large. We tend to draw comparisons to like an AWS platform, where you think about not everybody was able to have their own IT department and local data storage solutions, and so AWS opened up that solution for many more companies to grow and blossom. Think about the whole SaaS ecosystem that we've been able to see grow and expand as a result of that. And so for the space networking solution, the kind of nuts and bolts of that networking, it's not really a differentiated solution for a lot of space companies, but it consumes a lot of their time, a lot of operational overhead, complexity, and cost. And so for us, if we can do that at scale, provide it as a general generalized solution for the industry, then that opens up a lot of different businesses to really grow their prospects.
I just have to acknowledge what everybody's thinking watching this right now. Yes, this is the same Disney Channel. You're a Disney Channel actress. You're an award-winning
Bridgit, you have
singer-songwriter.
a bunch of fans around you. I'm
Yeah,
going to tell you.
you'll have
it's a different generation from Joe and me.
Here. So yes, this is the same Bridgit. How do you go from that world to investing your life in a space company?
You know,
you could be doing anything right now.
I think the space industry is full of people who are just extremely passionate, curious, and I feel really grateful to have discovered that community. And I also feel grateful that the world is kind of opening up its excitement around the mainstream aspects of this industry. Think about, Artemis this year. Think about SpaceX IPO.
Is there a halo effect from Artemis on all of your businesses?
I think what it points to is that these missions are becoming possible in a way that is more mainstream. And that's really the core of our business. The core of our business is how can we take all of these ambitious missions and get them further faster by providing the infrastructure that is kind of common and serves to be a strong foundation.
Actually, the Bloomberg team back home, they know my dad was involved in the initial space race, so we kind of grew up with this, and it's really fascinating to see it move so much into the private sector and kind of away from the government. Having said that, I'm curious about who's working with you, who are your customers, who's funding you, like what's the longer term plan here?
You've got a big round of funding.
Yes, we've raised around $140 million to date, and our customer base is very intentionally broad. We want to serve the whole space industry, and so that includes government customers that require ground connectivity for solutions ranging from launch to GPS satellites that power a ton of diverse applications terrestrially, to sensing applications. And then you have real commercial industry. So we're in communications with multiple public communications companies in space that are trying to resolve their networking infrastructure.
Where are you in terms of development and deployment? And just got about 30 seconds here.
It's a really big year for Northwood. We last year was about developing our very first site, our very first operational units. This year it's about scale. So we currently have sites in multiple continents, both in Australia and the United States. We're planning to be on 8 different countries this year and producing nearly 100 antenna units. So it's going to be a very busy year.
When are you going to space?
That's what's next, right? That's what this is all about.
One of our producers, James, I think wants to go to space too. I'm just going to tell you.
We'll put them together.
He's over there.
Producer James is actually with us at Milken. I'm glad you pointed that out. Bridgit, it's wonderful to meet you and great to see you. Thank you for all of your insights.
Thank you very much.
Northwood Space is the company. This is Balance of Power. She's Kara-Murza, and I'm Joe Mathieu. Great talk today.
Yes.
You're going off the panels. I'll meet you on Bloomberg TV and radio, 5 p.m. Eastern.
Want to go to space?
On the late edition of Balance of Power. Maybe we'll get to space. I don't think I want to go to space.
Not yet.
Charlie will have more on the markets coming straight ahead with us. Stay with us on Bloomberg.